Hey everyone, appreciate you for being here. Welcome to Being Brooke, where we demolish the corporate facades of modern day business. Join us as we ride the waves of the journeys that built today's most successful executives and entrepreneurs.
It's a blue ocean.
Sorry that I haven't replied to you in weeks. I'm just busy putting out all the fires. The quickest way to climb the corporate ladder all the way to unemployment. Burn the boats. Brain rattle. If you know, you know. Entrepreneurship, where delusion is not only encouraged but required. Time off? What's that?
Just go ahead and let me in.
Morale's down? Quick, call an all-hands meeting. If anyone asks to pick my brain one more time, there will be nothing left.
Everybody, welcome to Being Brooke. Today we have with us Brad McCrory. Brad, before we get started, we're actually starting something new here. So the podcast is all about demolishing corporate facades. In order to demolish corporate facades, you kind of have to have willingness from all parties involved. So we're going to start off by kind of taking a pact in the beginning, if you're okay with it, which is just to be open, honest, and vulnerable. Is that something that you think you can agree to throughout the whole podcast?
I'm in.
All right, cool. Brad, let's go ahead and just start by giving us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do for anybody listening and myself, we just met, that doesn't know who Brad McCrory is.
That's a good question. Who is Brad McCrory? My wife oftentimes tries to explain this to people. So I grew up in Metro Detroit, so grew up in a blue collar family that worked hard and have kind of moved around. Been married for 18 years. Professionally, I've been an entrepreneur since I was 22. One of those people that worked for other companies and realized I think I can do this better and had the drive and passion to do it. And also wasn't being compensated for the 80 to 100 hours a week I was willing to put in for chasing my dream. So early on became an entrepreneur, and that's kind of evolved over the past 20 years where sometimes I've started my own business. I think I've grown 3 or 4 companies to 7 figures. Sometimes I've stepped in as fractional CEOs for companies. But I would say at my core, I grow things. People, process, strategy. I've just kind of got a knack to realize that when people have problems that they think is related to a thing, it's usually people. And I've gotten okay at it, I guess.
Okay at managing people. I think that that's a big issue that nobody talks about as much in terms of how important it is to team build and to have good people around you and have people motivated to work around you as well, and learning that all people are a little bit different and one management style probably doesn't work for all those people. I'm curious, is there a key or something that you have top of mind that when you come in is maybe the most common issue that companies are facing, or the most prevalent thing, or the place where you are able to provide the most help when companies are maybe not managing people as well as they could be?
Yeah. So I think Brooke, we're just getting to know each other. So one thing that I'll do is I've learned everything that I've learned to date because I've screwed everything up at least 3 times. So I think for me, like remember early on in my 20s and early 30s when I was doing leadership poorly, I had some false expectations. One, I expected that everybody on my team was going to work as hard as I was going to work, or that was as invested as I was invested. And when you lead that way, you burn people out and it causes resentment, it causes friction. Rule number one that I see when I go into any organization is the people have to have a common vision, but it has to be beneficial to them. Like every person on the team has to see a path as to how the work they're doing on a daily basis not only feeds into the company, but also gives them space to where they're still people. Like they have families, they have kids, they have values, and so putting those things last just doesn't work anymore. I don't think it ever did, but it might have worked more 20 years ago than it is today. It's really about creating momentum in a business to where people have the space to feel loved and be themselves, and still accomplish their goals. I mean, it makes it tough in today's world because there's a lot of challenges in business, there's a lot of complexities, and there's a lot of outcomes that investors and ownership groups want. But at the same time, if your people aren't happy, none of that gets done at scale.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so tactically, I'm curious, and I know that you do both. You come in, you've grown from the beginning your own things, and you've also come in. So I'll clarify when I'm asking questions because I think the it's
Yeah.
probably a little bit different angles when you're doing both, but the roles where you've come in and actually helped grow the businesses that you were not necessarily the founder of, what does that process tactically look like? Are you meeting individually with everybody in the company to figure out what those visions and values and beliefs are? Or how do you actually go about implementing something like that?
Yeah, the first step has always been for me stabilization. So every company that I've come into, there's been three now. The first thing I did was you can't fix something unless it's like semi-functional. So meeting with each person in the team and understanding usually the biggest issue is that people have been put into roles that they're not good at. And so there's either a lack of a description of their job and they don't have clarity on what they're supposed to be doing, or they've just been asked to do other things over time and their jobs evolved into something that they never signed up for. And so usually step one is, what is everybody's role? What is everybody's job function? What are they supposed to be doing? Do they have clarity on that? And then are they happy in that role? Or do we need to have a plan over a 4 to 6 month period of time to transition them into the role that they need to? And then it's okay, now that we understand where everybody's at, what do we need? Because when people are outside of the role they're supposed to be in, it's usually because the leader didn't identify a need and they just moved someone who wasn't a good fit into that need and they were stressed about it. You start getting resentment where people feel like I'm taking on 30% more responsibility, I'm not getting paid. So it's really about creating an architecture within a business where everyone feels stable, and then it's backing up and revisiting vision, mission, values, core. And when you do it that way, people appreciate it because they've noticed, okay, step one, instead of coming in and this person asking more of me, they've come in and they've actually helped me architect my job to a place where I actually know what my expectations are. I may not like it, but at least I know what my expectations are. I have clarity. I can focus on a daily basis. There's not a lot of stress because I don't have a bunch of crazy things being thrown at me on a daily basis that shouldn't be thrown at me. So first for me, it's always creating stability and then going back and revisiting the vision.
Very cool. And so then, what's the biggest difference in the process that you're following when you're coming in versus the companies that you've actually founded? What were some of the challenges that you maybe had never faced or didn't think of that was different when you were actually that first boots on the ground without anybody else being there?
Yeah, I'll answer the one biggest thing I've learned because now this is my fourth company that I've started from scratch, and then I'll kind of come back to that question. But the one thing that I've learned fourth time in is that when you're starting something from scratch, um, every single time you're going to bring someone on the team, think above what you think that you're capable of recruiting. One of the biggest challenges new businesses face is their company grows fast and it outgrows the people because the self-image of the entrepreneur when they started the business was at a low place, and by month 6, month 12, month 24, the business grows so fast they look around and say the people that I have recruited aren't can't handle the growth of the business right now, and so they spend very early and often within their business re-architecting the business, and it's not fair to the people that they bring in super early. So I would say that the big thing is make sure that you're willing to recruit to your vision, not to your current self-image as an entrepreneur. That's the big thing. But I think from a starting point perspective, it gets a little bit easier because you get the opportunity to architect things in the front end. You get the opportunity to craft the vision day one, craft the mission day one, craft your values day one, to communicate any new members, whether they be contractors or employees, what those are from day one. And so you can walk into those relationships with clarity, and things can actually grow faster without being as stressful. When I walk into a company and I want to create change, I kind of have to recruit the same type of person that lives in chaos, like is very good at leading up and leading sideways, doesn't need a ton of direction, even though we want to get to the point where we're giving a ton of direction, because there's already so much chaos that's happening that you kind of have to recruit that one type of person that can almost thrive and prefer living in chaos versus not until you get to a point of stability. When you're starting from scratch, you really get the time to be patient, plan up front, make sure you're setting clear expectations, and hire for culture day one.
That's a very good point. I'm curious, and this is something I mean I noticed from your LinkedIn, and I think it's true for most entrepreneurs. One of the things I even talk about in the intro is like entrepreneurship is the quickest way to climb the corporate ladder to unemployability. Um, there's a lot of, to your point of what you just said, certain people that function especially in the startup world, for a stage of a company, but
Mhm.
maybe don't aren't best suited for when there is a ton of direction if you hired that person for that role. I'm curious what your perspective is, maybe as a hiring manager, both as a hiring manager and also as somebody who has applied for roles, on when people have these kind of job hopping things on their resume. How is that something that you explain? Is that a red flag for you when you're hiring, or is that something that you kind of almost expect at that stage?
Yeah, honestly, like I may be different. It'd be interesting to touch base with you like 20 guests from now and see if this is the case. But like, I don't know the last time I've looked at a resume. I
Really?
don't look at resumes. I look at capabilities, and so I try to go deep with someone that is that's applying, and I look for two things. One, I ask questions to understand experiences that map to culture and values. For me, I'm high integrity, I'm high character. If things are going to get tough and you're not going to be able to make the right decision that's a long-term decision for the business and even in your personal life, probably not the person that I want on the team. So I try to pull that out of somebody with questions. And secondly, like I go deep in expertise, and so I try to in as much as possible hire experts instead of generalists. And I think in our world today, and this is our current job market, I'm sure this is happening. People are getting pretty specialized. In a business, if they want someone that is doing email marketing for them, they want someone that just does email marketing for them, not someone that is like, I do email marketing, I do SEO, I do paid. They want specialists because the outcomes that they're looking to drive require that. And so I really look for people that beyond job experience, if someone has job hopped, what I also know from being in the space for 20 years is that that could be a reflection of they're not really picking good leadership as much as it is if they're hopping jobs. Especially if you're in the tech world. I've been in e-commerce for 20 years. There's a lot of poor leaders leading businesses, and so it's not necessarily a reflection of the candidate as much as it could be a reflection of the leader. So I tried to dig deep on capability. And then from a leadership perspective, when you asked a question, it was just a funny um, story that came up for me. But I remember my first business that I grew, and I've grown it to, it was an e-commerce agency, grew it to $4 million in 36 months. And I had an offer to get it acquired. And the person that was acquiring the business pulled me aside one day and he said, Brad, we're not buying your business. And I was like, what do you mean? You're backing out of the deal? He's like, no, no, no. He's like, we're buying the Brad show. Like, you as an individual have had the capability to get stuff done and like lead everything. But as a leader, doing everything yourself and actually learning how to invest and scale people are two different things. And that was like a big realization for me that as I started going further in my career is that I not only had to get good at what I was doing, but I had to really learn how to lead other people and pull value out of them instead of here's the difference. It was I was getting value out of them. I was forcing it and I had to learn how to pull that value out of them and raise that next person up so that I was always building leadership in an organization.
Was there anything that you did aside from just straight experience? Like, have you had mentors and advisors? Have you gone to books? What is it that you do to learn that, like, to have learned that skill and to learn other skills that you've learned you needed to learn throughout your journey?
Yeah, so I think I'm trying to break this down to back when I was fairly new in the world. I started picking a skill and going deep, and so I remember I think it was the folks who invented Basecamp back in the day wrote a book, and it might have been called Rework, but they talked about the concept of being a T player versus um, a flat line, and so they had some general skills across the board, but they found one area and they went deep. And so I started doing that. I started in sales and got really good at it to the point to where I started to build multiple T's. Then I went into digital marketing and I went really deep there. I've always been a hands-on learner, so I've always had a side project that's been that I can tinker and tweak and play around with, whether it be building websites or building. I think that's what got me into entrepreneurship was I think I'm an accidental entrepreneur that I was just trying to refine my craft and something took off. But I always tweaking. I early on listened to a lot of podcasts. I think that's good. I think the challenge with podcasts is that, and I know we're on a podcast, but to go deep,
Yeah.
I think the challenge with podcasts is that you're getting kind of the high level like direction. If you want that expertise that qualifies you to kind of be elite in your craft, you really have to seek mentorship beyond that. So I honestly spent a season where I was doing a lot of LinkedIn DMing and Instagram DMing for mentorship, and I think I'd encourage people to do that. You'd be shocked at how many replies you'll actually get back because people in a position of success, like it's like people are afraid to reach out, and so I built mentorship at every season, and then I got to a point eventually where I literally made it a point where every quarter I would evaluate who I was seeking mentorship from and getting mentorship from, and I would expand the list and go bigger. And that was something that I've done now for 8 years. And so, depending on the role that I was in or what I was trying to do, I'd always evaluate: am I getting the mentorship that I need? And even willing to invest into that. I mean, it got to the point where I was investing into masterminds, which they're private, intimate time where you get to spend time with these people for instead of an hour phone call for a day or 2 days. Have been things as well. And then now, it really like I just I'm not afraid to do stuff. So if there's something I haven't done and I need to do it, I always roll up my sleeves, and whether it be through Google, whether it be through online courses, whether it be through tweaking or playing with something, whether it be hiring a contractor that's really good at it and watching them do it and learn it. Like I think there's no one way to learn something, but having an arsenal of tools and understanding that in today's world, if you have something that you can learn and you don't, it's kind of an excuse. I mean, like literally, there's not one thing that we could think of in this podcast where both of us couldn't take 5 minutes and Google it and have a plan on how to learn it within 6 months. So I think that's the one encouragement is like it's everyone learns differently. That's kind of how I've done it. I'm more of a hands-on optimizer, learn on the fly. But I think the key is to decide to learn.
Be very proactive in your learning and your growth experience.
Yeah.
Um, Gotcha. So you're obviously a very seasoned leader and very good at what you do. I always still love to ask people that are very seasoned and good at what they do, what is your biggest fear as a leader right now? Something that you're struggling with? What keeps you up at night?
Um, yeah, I grew this gray beard just for the show, just so I could. Um, I honestly like. I've gotten to a point where nothing really, and I've had some lows. I've had a couple businesses fail where I've had to take on got like 500K in debt and have paid that off. And so I think like when you go through massive failure, there's not much that keeps me up at night at this point. I think I've learned the perspective that there's nothing that I can't tackle in the morning, and that if I chip away at for multiple days in a row, it's not going to get done. I think the most important thing to me in this season is that as I continually lean into spending time to build vision in terms of what the future looks like, is um, staying focused on what's most important is gets tougher the more that's on your plate. The more if you end up running multiple 7 8 figure businesses, employees, market conditions, staying focused is tough. And so with being married 18 years, having two kids that are 8 and 10 years old, missing that and not keeping what's important and understanding that all the money in the world is not going to buy more time with my kids and more time with my wife. It's something that I don't say keeps me up at night, but I'm very aware of, and would be the thing that would keep me up at night if I didn't get that right. I've just the business stuff comes and goes, and I've just learned that if you don't have something that matters outside of it, matters most outside of it, then the business stuff can be stressful. It can break you honestly. So I think perspective is key, and getting those things wrong would be my biggest fear.
I appreciate that perspective, and I think it's an important perspective from entrepreneurs. Something, if you're okay with it, I want to dive into from what you said. Maybe right now you've learned so many lessons that you don't have a biggest fear because what maybe would be your biggest fear is something that you've gotten pretty good at prioritizing. But in those times where you mentioned I think every entrepreneur has had failures in their journey, but I think that they're talked about so much less than the successes,
Yeah.
and there's so many lessons to be learned. And so what I've found is just talking about them, all these people are going through this, I always say simultaneously alone, because people are there to celebrate when you're in success, but a lot of times failures are something that people don't want to talk about. So in those times where you had those failed businesses, if you were able to kind of like put your hat on back to the day that that happened, the day you got the news, the day that you realized that that was going to happen. What was that like, and what did get you through it?
That's a really good question. Crushing. I had a business that was going to be acquired that the company backed out of acquiring us, and in the process caused us a massive cash flow deficit. First time that I'd run a business, didn't have raised financing. We were profiting, funding everything from our own profits, and so we went from selling a business successfully to closing. And I remember picking up the phone and spending a day calling customers, telling them we weren't going to be able to deliver the projects, telling vendors we weren't going to be able to pay them their bills, and but telling them all that like I will. It may take me 5 years, but I'm not like. And it was a tough day because I'm integrity and character is so important to me, and I remember getting advice from people saying, "Hey, bankrupt your business and walk away from it." And no judgment to anybody that has done that, but I remember sitting in that moment and realizing like it may take me 40 years to pay this off. But that was a tough day, and honestly, for me, and this may not be for everyone else, but like it was a crushing day, and I think without our faith, like for us, it's Jesus. Like I spent many a Sunday morning at the altar of my church getting prayer and a family and a community coming around me. That I mean, I don't know that I feel like I've had the resiliency and the grit, and I think most entrepreneurs like take that risk because they do. But until you go through something like that, like you don't really realize that it takes however you execute it or however you go through it, it takes more than you. It's just something that like we're not, designed to walk through as humans. So for me, it was faith. It was a lot of leaning into that, and I think that's given me a lot of the perspective later in life that we've been able to walk through. But it's been, yeah, it was. We actually moved out of our house and we lived in a $6,000 used 20-year-old RV for 2 years, while we drove around from consulting gig to consulting gig so that I could make money and pay off debt. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but also I'd wish it on anybody who wanted to be successful because it was on the other side. That's the reason why not much gives me fear at night. I just
Yeah.
been through some things.
Well, when you've lost it all, when you've been maybe theoretically at the bottom, then there's a lot less that scares you. There's a couple of questions that are going through my head based on what you said. I want to start with which was the hardest conversation you had? Did you have employees? Was it your wife? Was it customers? Was it vendors? Is there like a conversation specifically that stands out in your mind that was the hardest one to have?
Um, probably the conversations with my wife to say, hey, like, because in my heart I knew that or what the right thing to do was, but I also wasn't walking through that alone for the next 24 months. Like she's there with me, and she actually was before I had a chance to say it, said, well, you know what the right thing to do is, and so it was that turned into a very easy conversation, but it was a hard conversation. And then just I think the other thing is like when you're going through failure, like we put an expectation on what's good and what's bad, and hindsight 2020, and 3 years, 4 years later, some of the conversations I thought were going to be the toughest conversations ended up being the best. Like I had a couple of very ununderstanding customers that got really mad, and I ended up getting sued, over it. And at the time, I'm like, oh, that's devastating. And then I realized that I had insurance for that. So at the time, I was like, this is awful, but like some of it got taken care of. So I think we oftentimes get emotional in the weeds and when we're going through things. And so I think I've learned to realize that I I'm not fortune teller. I can't predict the future, and all I can do is manage my emotions and do my best in the now, and hope that that's good enough. And what I realized 20 years later is it is.
Yeah. Well, and that brings me to my next question, which is and I think I know the answer to this, but I want to ask it anyways. Do you feel like you're the same Brad McCrory that you were before that experience, or did that experience kind of fundamentally change who you are?
The experience changed me. Like I don't to be clear, like I made mistakes out of lack of experience, lack of pulling in mentorship. Like I take full ownership over that season of my life. And so I've learned a lot. Basic things like the importance of cash flow management and risk, and understanding that like in my 20s and 30s, I was very risk adverse. I still am a little semi, like risk, but I was, all in all the time, all the chips on the table, every hand. And that's how I operated. And so I've learned, how to use wisdom. I've learned how to put processes in place to make decisions better. I used to operate everything I did in a ready, fire, aim mentality, and now I'm much more pragmatic about developing strategies and plans and vetting them before I take any kind of major action. I think before, like, I was probably building businesses for out of personal recognition and like for the wrong reasons. And so I've really learned to slow down and make sure that what I'm doing really has meaning. And it's the right thing that I should be doing, not just doing something because it could get more revenue or could get more profit, or I could get, two more good reviews on Google. So I think I've learned to really focus on pointing my life in a direction that matters versus trying to have the direction in which I'm pointing my life provide the meaning. So that's been a big one as well. So I think it's it's really like I wish in that age bracket that I would have done a better job of even though I was more so than most people I knew, finding mentorship and wise counsel. Didn't have a board, didn't have an advisory board. I think there's structures and things that could have been put in place where smart people would have came alongside me and said, "Hey, this doesn't really look the way that it should." So I think some of that stuff has been a big learning curve. But I think from a values perspective that I've always been the same. So, I think that's something that I recommend to have people establish early on. Who are you? What are the five things that are non-negotiables in your life? Because if I didn't have those in place, I wouldn't have gone through that season well.
Yeah. Has it changed how you have mentored or guided or led other people? You had the phone calls that were the good phone calls and the bad phone calls, and mentioned, I think a lot of times I was talking about it with somebody on the podcast right in the beginning that friends and certain advisors and business colleagues can sometimes be giving you advice and support from with the best intentions, but sometimes you don't need just advice and support from friends. You need that accountability or that person to come say, "Hey, things don't maybe look the way that they are." Have you had to has it changed your perspective in having some of those hard conversations with people that you've mentored and led?
It changed my leadership. Was processing through that situation. A good friend of mine called me one day, and he'd been in a similar situation 10 years previously, and he said, and this is a statement that's still like it wrecked me that day, and it's still something that's core to my leadership. But he said, you can be out of integrity and have not put yourself out of integrity. You can put yourself in a position where other people's decisions force you out of integrity. It's like, and that's the level of integrity that you need to walk in. And at the time, I had, commitments and promises to employees that, had career paths to be with me for the next 4 or 5 years, that I had to go from that to I have to let you go. And it really changed my perspective in understanding that as I hire people in every future phase, that like I need to be as transparent and honest about where the company's at. I need to make sure that I'm running a healthy business that provides and fosters an opportunity for people to grow, and be safe. And I think I could see the changes in that, because in the next several companies that I've been able to run, I've been able to be very, very honest with people and say, hey, like, we're in a transition phase and I'm brand new here, and, we're going to do our best, but this is what the worst, like, I think understanding that, I could have communicated differently. I could have communicated like that person who's working for me matters as much as or more than me. And so leading that way and actually communicating that way and creating an authentic like family team relationship to where people aren't caught off guard by things that happen in business, and there's clear communication understanding. I think is that was a big thing for me. Like that was the toughest thing for me, was not being able to. I mean, in that season, I literally, I don't think I've ever shared this, but I think I literally drove. The last 3 weeks the business was open. I worked from 7 to 5, and then I drove Uber from 5 to 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was driving Uber to pay my own bills so that we could make payroll the last 3 weeks. And so like that, like I don't want that to like when I hire people, when I lead people, when we have people part of the team, like that can be avoided when a leader's transparent and I think and oftentimes, and I was this leader 10 years ago, but we can't today in today's world lead from false optimism. We have to lead from a place of truth and vision. And I think that was the biggest thing I learned.
And it sounds like transparency. I know that's not necessarily a word that you've used, but I think it seems core to what you believe in the way that you communicate with people is just being very transparent as well. Well, thanks for sharing that story. One of my favorite things to do on the podcast is get people to share something that they've maybe never shared before. So I appreciate you holding up your word to the pact and saying open, honest, and vulnerable. And I think it's really helpful for other entrepreneurs to hear this thing because, like I said, I think that these types of failures are things that everybody is going through. It's just something that maybe people aren't sharing or talking about as much. But we can really learn lessons from other people. And I also think not even just learn lessons, but just not feel so alone. I think that that community piece is so huge in being able to get through those things. And it's something that I see not a lot of entrepreneurs have a big community or strong support system because they're working the 80-hour weeks. So how is it, I'm curious, is it your upbringing that, you've had faith since you were young? What is it that's maybe kept that importance of having that strong support system like so core to who you are, or making sure that you have that support system? Because I do think it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with is kind of the isolation and really pouring themselves into work. So was that something that you learned the hard way or have just kind of always been lucky enough to understand was important?
I'd say it was lucky, but I've also learned it the hard way. I didn't grow up with any faith or connection there, but I think one more transparent story is in my early 20s. I was already in a Fortune 1000 company, Salesforce, pre-college degree, making 170 grand, and broke and probably rolling into work drunk every day because I'd stay out till 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I, after doing that for a couple of years, I had to start reevaluating my life and understanding that what I thought was who I wanted to be or the things that I wanted in my life were actually moving to a place where I was rock bottom and just completely broken. And so I think a lot of people, it's a common story, fill in the details of the individual, but oftentimes people have to find a rock bottom place before they make change. And so that was really what drove me to look for community very early on, to understand that if I'm not the person that I want to be, and I don't have the focus and who I am as a person, that none of the business stuff really matters. I can achieve a bunch of stuff, and it's important. I think I'm now 42, and I look around, and people that I thought that we would be friends with, my wife and I, for a long period of time, have gotten divorced, and I think for me, what's most important needs to be what's most important. And so I encourage entrepreneurs that, put that stuff first. And if you ever have any questions or if you ever need any help, like I'll be the first person to help, because although not perfect, like I think I've done a pretty good job of understanding that if I don't have my faith in line, if I don't have my marriage right, I don't have my parenting right, that's literally where stress comes from. It's people blame it on the work, they blame it on the job, but if life is dysfunctional, I've put it this way: when life is functional, I found business is easy. When life is dysfunctional, I found business is hard. And so I think people focus on the business to get that functional and hope that downstream affects everything else. I've just learned that alignment is completely wrong. Like everything else gets aligned, the business is easy. You don't have to work 8 hours a week when you've got a good marriage and your kids are well behaved and you're not in a teacher's office every other week, or you've got good relationships, good deep, not like surface level friendships, but like good deep friendships where you hang out with. I define it as you hang out with people where when you leave, you feel more energy than less energy. And so I think that's been the key that I learned early on, was I did it one way, and I've always been kind of like the optimizer. It's not working, obviously, let's go do it this way. So I kind of lucked into it, I guess, but also learned it the hard way.
Well, through a period of kind of maybe constant testing and learning and making tweaks and adjustments the same way you do in business and life almost, it sounds like. I love that quote. I mean, that's a quote, I think, Brad McCrory quote that is a very good quote. It reminds me of that quote that says, hard decisions, easy life, easy decisions, hard life. And I think that quote or that sentiment is very, very true and a very useful gold nugget for entrepreneurs out there. What I want to do now is bring it to current day. So, what are you working on now? I think it's a little bit newer, so would love to hear just, what led you to to the thing that you're doing now, and what is that thing?
Yeah, so I have a couple things going on. I have a management consulting company called Velocity Focused, and I do fractional chief marketing officer stuff. So a company that's underperforming revenue or just wants to grow, um, I'll come in and I'll help them architect their strategy, build a go-to-market strategy, and then find talent to be able to deliver work. So help them kind of build a fractional internal team versus if they're not ready for like full-time employees. So it's a lot of the same stuff I've always been doing, but in a more innovative model that aligns really talented people with really meaningful work, but also from a business perspective, a lot of these companies are not in a spot where they are ready to be hiring a full-time person for a role. They may have 20 hours a week worth of a need, but they don't know what the work that needs done. It's not defined. They don't know how to have the talent for it. So that's part of what I'm doing now. And that's going really well. It's probably, knock on wood, the fastest growing company that I've started. So it's been great. And then I'm launching in a couple of months a online course called uh, Passion to Profit, and I just found that right now there's for lack of a better term, the arms race in technology with AI and machine learning. There's so much software out there that can be used, and I don't even think people realize it. But if you have something you're passionate about, you can literally put it in about 2 hours a day outside of your normal job and build seven-figure online websites because it's all generative. It's all, you're writing prompts and getting back inputs. There's a global workforce that can be supportive, and so really trying to help a community tap into that. I think one of my life purposes here in the next 20 years is to help people create some time freedom to where they can focus more on their family and they can focus on more of the things that are most important. And to do that, like it's kind of tough unless you don't start creating margin in many areas of your life. So that's going to go live in a couple weeks, and I'm super excited about that. And then yeah, like I also we moved to Wilmington actually to be part of a great church that was starting, and I got to step in to be their kids director there. So every Sunday I'm prepping curriculum and teaching
How cool.
45
Talk about
45 to 50 kids.
Talk about balance and skills. I mean, leading a classroom full of 45 or 50 kids is a talent in and of itself, as well. I'm curious, so for the businesses that you're currently running, are these things that I think there's a lot of curiosity, or I personally have a lot of curiosity of like, how long do things take? And do you have to plan like, are you planning this 10 years ago? You've had this stuff in notebooks or idea boards, and then you just saw that the timing came, or was it that timing came where you then were like, well, maybe I'm ready to go on my own, and then you thought of the idea at the right time? How did that work, and just like the conception of what these companies are?
Yeah, I think I'll look at it from today's perspective versus 20 years ago. What I've learned is um, I need to develop elite skills in areas that I'm good at. I'm good at sales. I'm good at marketing. I'm good at leading people. And so I need to continually make those skills elite and focus on those things and not focus on things that I'm not elite at. I'm not going to be a CFO. I'm not going to be an operations leader. I'm going to recruit amazing operations leaders and CFOs everywhere that I go. Um, and from there, what I try to do when I'm looking to start a new entity is I try to find the next evolution of how to deploy those skills. And so, for example, Velocity, it's the agency model's been in place for 20 years. A model where a company's coming in and they're developing the strategy, which is oftentimes where agencies are weak, and they're matching like global talent using some of the infrastructures that are available to find them today to make their costs actually less and their results actually higher. That's an iteration of everything that I've done, but it's looking at the current market and redeploying those skills in a different way. So I'm a big fan of. I think oftentimes people try to kind of go into something new, new industry, new like. I just I'm probably going to be and again I'm going to use like a bunch of 70s cliche statements, but I'm going to be a one trick pony for the next 20 years. Like it's going to anything that I do in the next 20 years is going to be some evolution of sales, marketing, and people. And I'm going to get really, 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 really good at that because I've learned and studied from some of the most successful people and I'm in a phase of my life now where it's like I want to finish strong. I don't want a next strong 5 years. I don't want a next strong 10 years. I want a next strong 30 years. And the people that I've seen do that well didn't deviate. They might have interests in other things. Like I may go, decide to paint as a hobby, but like I'm not going to be a painter and make that my living because it's not my skill set that I've developed. So I think that's how even the profit for passion. Literally, I'm just packaging up the things that I've gotten really good at and putting it into an e-course. So I'm a big fan of finding multiple revenue streams to take advantage of your skill sets. Even so, like I'm now at a phase where I'm focusing on passive income instead of active income. Um, so there's, I could be investing in a lot of things, and there's, you know, whatever home flipping courses and all real estate investment stuff. Um, Even for me, like I have to be disciplined enough to not want to go do that because it's a distraction from what I'm really good at. So in those areas, even as I'm trying to transition into passive income, what am I good at? People, sales, marketing. So people, align myself with people that have that expertise and leverage their expertise to get into those areas. So I think it's really about understanding what you're really good at and finding a way to not get distracted as you're evolving into the next thing.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I'm hearing is that I think is important is you're not deviating and you're doing, you say one trick pony, but you are innovating. And I think a lot of people think
Yeah.
innovation means that you do stray, but you're innovating. You're staying true to modern times. You're changing what it is that you're doing based on today's market, and you're innovating that, but you are not deviating from maybe those core skills or those things that you're good at. And I think that maybe that's just an important nuance to point out is innovation. You are innovating, and innovation is important, but it doesn't mean that you have to deviate from what it is that you're good at.
I think you nailed it. I think that probably comes back to my roots where I grew up in Metro Detroit, where innovation was like Henry Ford, like automotive people doing automotive things automotively better. And so I think the way you just defined it, where I feel most people are innovating nowadays because they're like trying to do something that they've never done before. I'm like, well, no, that's like you might be innovating but like you're not innovating because there's 10 other people that have 20 years experience in what you're doing that are already here, and it's going to take you that much longer to get there. So I think your description is great. I would almost say that innovating is kind of taking something that you're excellent at and trying ways to apply trends and themes from other spaces to accelerate that.
Thanks. That's another golden nugget from Brad McCrory. Um, My last question that I want to chat about a little bit today, or a topic that I want to chat a little bit on, is I saw on LinkedIn that you're investor as well. I'm curious, what is that? And I don't know how long you've invested in or to what capacity you and I just met, but I have seen at the companies I've been at, a lot of times a clear kind of gap between stakeholder, shareholder. And so anything, just honestly, any nuggets, like was it hard to go from the hat of operating to then being an investor if you are investing in other ventures? Has it given you a whole different lens and perspective that has maybe helped fill that gap that you've brought to, a shareholders or stakeholders? What has that done for you or evolved for you to kind of get to learn that hat, wear that hat, learn that area of expertise? What are what are the sentiments behind that?
Yeah, I would say I invest a little bit differently than most. Primarily because in a season of my consulting over the last 10 years, I was brought in by private equity firms to fix underperforming investments. And so what I found was 90% of the time, if there was an underperforming investment, it all rolled down to an underperforming CEO, or a CEO that hired an underperforming team and didn't know how to assess it. And so, where where my approach is a little bit different is, um, I have to be very deep in the business. Like I have to be able to like actually assess the recipe is simple. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right strategy? Do you have the right product? And if you don't have those things, there's not a amount of cash in the world that's going to build a value into that business to where it's a an ROI from an investment perspective. And I think that's where most people stay away from uh, private equity or other types of investments that are similar because um, they're higher risk just from that basis, especially early stage stuff where you have an unproven founder. So for me, um, a lot of my investment looks like people are bringing me in to help them like craft the growth go to market side of things as in an advisory role, and then there's some cash attached to it. So, um, and that's this season. I think in a future season, maybe I'm more of a hands off investor, but I like to invest into things that I know. And if I'm going to invest in something that I know, um, I want to understand that it's going to win. And yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it.
And
I am heavily, go ahead.
tell me if this sentiment's wrong, but to me, and this is something that is kind of core and fundamental to what I believe as well, because I think that there's all this money being poured into products and companies, and that there's a severe undervaluation of the people that are behind those products and companies. Like I don't know if you've ever read the book Crossing the Chasm. It's a marketing book, but it talks about a lot of times the best product fails. And I am all about product led sales, and I understand that product's important, and I value people that are in product, but there's so much that goes into the success of a company, and I believe fundamentally what's behind that a lot of times are the people that are behind the company. And to me, it almost sounds like you're investing in people more than anything else. That's kind of what your gauge is when you're just if it's something A that is in your expertise, obviously, and that you can help with, but also the people and the strategy. Is that does that seem correct?
Yeah, so I think to be, I love using sports as analogies, but like I think you can use, a football team or a basketball team as an analogy. If you don't have enough talent, you're not going to win. If you have enough talent but the wrong culture, you're also not going to win. If you have the right talent and the right culture, but you have the wrong plays being called, you're also not going to win. So it really is about, do you have the right people? Are they doing the right things? And are they doing it for the right reasons? And if those three things don't exist, the value at the end of the day is not going to be there from an investment perspective. And that's why you see very few companies um, succeed at the level that an investor would like. And the ones that do have that common formula. So they've found a way to get the right people doing the right things for the right reasons at scale.
Well, my guess is, and correct me if I'm wrong here as well, but this is kind of another fundamental belief that I have, especially in modern day investing, is you have this really unique skill of, I know it's an unpopular opinion, but you have that skill, you know how to do those things, as to where historically a lot of people that are funding companies have finance backgrounds. They've never operated in these companies. So how do you think that there's any way to assess aside from having, lived it, or do you think that living it is what's given you, that unique ability to actually assess that? Or do you think that there is some formula or way that finance or private equity can assess that without having operated within it?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing is that I'm actually seeing finance and private equity partner with people like me. So they've done such a good job at building out such amazing models to determine success and failure of companies, um, but have been ineffective at describing the human impacts and variables that cause when numbers do look good, why do they look good? Or what are the different dynamics that have led to these models? And so that's where a lot of my work's come from in the past couple of years. Non-investing work is private equity firms coming in and saying, "Hey, we have a late stage company that is underperforming, and we don't know why, and so we need someone to figure it out." And they're starting to realize that there are operators that like have it's a normal thing to find someone that's gone into five companies in 10 years and flipped them around and built winning cultures that have won. which I don't think that really existed 20 years ago. 20 years ago is I'm going to go be the CEO of this business for 20 years, 30 years. And so I think I am starting to see a fusion of private equity investment partnering with operators that are proven to help not only. I think what I was seeing is to come fix the investments that were deployed and make them winners, and now I'm starting to see it almost in the due diligence process. Like, hey, before we do an investment, can you come in and tell us from your perspective operationally, is this a good investment? So not everybody, but there's been three or four PE firms that I work with that are starting to invest that money in the front end and realizing there's a direct correlation between the success of their investments and making sure that the leadership and the strategy inside the business is operationally sound. You have to like it's that gap between forever. It's like, okay, here's what the numbers look like, and here's a pitch deck. Yeah, let's invest. They're starting to go deep and understand that it's not just the numbers and it's not just the pitch deck, but something within that company is helping it get to that place. We need to understand what it is, do more of it, nurture it, and is it ready to scale? I think one of the toughest things that we've seen as a byproduct of investing in private equity over the last 20 years is you get a company that's doing $3 million and has a nice pitch deck, and you throw $100 million into it with a CEO who's never run a $4 million business that's going from 3 to 4 with the expectation that they're going to 100 and just expecting that that's going to be okay and work. Like that's
Yeah.
tough for anybody.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but to almost bring this full circle, say that people are interested in a career track like that. It is developing this expertise, as you mentioned, and not deviating. The deals almost came to you, right? These aren't jobs that you're necessarily going out and applying for. It's your proven expertise in the space and the fact that you've done it, that these deals are almost coming to you, and the fact that you almost haven't deviated. Like, my guess is that you couldn't have predicted maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe that day that we talked about where you had experienced a failed business, that this was something that was going to happen. It was just an accumulation of staying disciplined, of learning that skill, where these opportunities started to open up for you.
Yep, and it's people that don't understand what I do, talking to people that don't understand what I do. So it's literally like a CEO talking to a buddy of like, oh man, I got to figure this out. Our business is underperforming, and like kind of trying to describe the problem, and the person he's talking to is like, I know a guy that I think does that, and I'm that guy. And so it's really weird, but it's organically like, oh well, like we just launched a new brand on our website and our sales are down, and oh well, I know a guy, and it always turns into like this the perception of what the challenge might be, and it always ends up being it's something to do with the people or something to do with the strategy. But yeah, it's super organic at this point. It's kind of weird, but I think in the future, what I do and kind of the background is getting more of a name and like oh that's the growth guy or but I think really it's people are sitting around having a cocktail with trusted colleagues and saying I got to figure this out. I don't know what it is. I don't know what to do and um, track record of delivering results is definitely what's evolved. And I would say even too for people starting on a business, and moving into that space. I don't know that in any of the stuff that I've done personally, I don't know that I've ever like done any marketing. I just got really good at what I was doing, and business came in, because of that. So that's and I think we kind of live in an age where people think that they can kind of build an online persona and be like, I made it, and then like, oh crap, I got to figure out how to deliver the work. But I think that's kind of a lost art.
Very cool. Well, really appreciate you for being on today. Before we do sign off, is there any last messages or tips for entrepreneurs that you have that you'd like to share?
I think just in general, my encouragement to entrepreneurs is to spend time every day making sure that they know what's most important. And if they run their businesses and they live their lives out of a place of keeping what's most important, that when rough times come, they'll be ready. Um, when good times come, they'll be ready. I've seen more entrepreneurs fail by hitting success poorly than failures. And so I think keeping the most important thing, would be my encouragement and recommendation. And I think the last thing, and I forget who I heard this from, so I can't give them proper credit, but um, it might have been a Gary Vee quote from back in the day, but things are never as bad as you think they are, and they're never as good as you think they are. And if you can kind of keep a non-emotional focus to what you're doing over a long period of time versus the short micro moments, at the end of the day, 10 years later, 20 years later, you'll be where you want to be.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. Another last golden nugget from Brad McCrory, and thanks again for being on the pod. We appreciate you.
Well, appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me, and have a great week.